Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of the planet's very first great circulatory system. This wasn't just a network for moving silk and spices, it was a superhighway that carried ideas, religions, and really the blueprint for our entire modern global economy. You know that feeling, right? You click a button online, and a few days later, a package from the other side of the planet shows up. It feels like a modern miracle. But believe it or not, this global web of exchange has incredibly deep roots that stretch back thousands of years. And we're not just talking about a few camels wandering through the desert. We're talking about a massive, sophisticated network that was, for all intents and purposes, the planet's first great internet, the Silk Roads. So we're going to zoom in on the period right after the year 1200, which is when these ancient routes really exploded into a second golden age. This wasn't some new startup, okay? This was a massive, system-wide upgrade to the world's original information superhighway. All across Africa, Europe, and Asia, the appetite for luxury goods was just insatiable. Now, for centuries, empires like the Abbasid Caliphate had kept these trade routes humming along, but they were about to kickstart something on a scale the world had never, ever seen before. This timeline really gives us a great bird's-eye view. You can see things start to pick up in the 8th century, and then boom, around 1200, demand just goes through the roof. But look at what happens next. That's the real game changer. The Mongols arrive. And they didn't just join the party. They took it over, unifying this entire network under one powerful rule. Okay, let's get into this, because it's such a fascinating paradox. We all know the Mongol conquests were famously brutal, right? But what came after was this incredible period of peace and security, especially for merchants. So what was it? What was the single biggest thing that turned the Silk Roads from a bunch of risky, dangerous paths into a booming superhighway for global commerce? Yep, it was the Mongol Empire. This era is actually known as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. For the first time, a single power controlled this massive, unbroken stretch of land from China all the way to the edge of Europe. This meant a merchant could travel almost the entire length of the Silk Road, and for the whole journey, they were under the protection of just one government. And what's really amazing is just how practical the Mongols were about all this. They weren't just conquerors, they were smart governors who understood business. They actually elevated the status of merchants, they poured money into fixing the roads, and they made banditry pretty much a death sentence. All of a sudden, the biggest risk of doing business, getting robbed and killed, was almost off the table. But wait, the Mongol security on land? That was only half the story. While the roads were becoming safer, a whole other revolution was happening out on the steppes. Some incredible new technologies were popping up that made shipping goods by water way easier, faster, and a whole lot more profitable. And this chart just perfectly illustrates the huge technological lead China had at the time. Their ships, the legendary Chinese junks, were absolutely colossal compared to what Europeans were sailing. I mean, they were bigger, more stable, and could carry way more cargo. You combine that with innovations like the magnetic compass, and it's no wonder they completely dominated the sea routes across the Indian Ocean. So all of this trade, this explosion of movement, it had some pretty profound effects. It didn't just move stuff around. It literally built huge multicultural cities right in the middle of deserts and led to financial breakthroughs that, well, we still use today. Let's just zoom in on a perfect example of this, the city of Kashgar. It was located at this critical point where all these different routes of the Silk Road came together. It wasn't just a rest stop. It went from being a simple desert oasis to a booming international metropolis, a true crossroads of the entire world. Just look at this. This table shows you what a true melting pot Kashgar was. You had Buddhist merchants trading textiles right next to Christian merchants selling grapes. You had Muslim and Zoroastrian traders dealing in porcelain and horses. It was a place where all these different faiths and cultures didn't just bump into each other, they were doing business, living together. All of it fueled by the constant flow of commerce. Now, to support this insane amount of travel, this brilliant piece of infrastructure popped up, the caravanserai. Seriously, just think of them as the motels of the Silk Road. They were these fortified inns built about a day's camel journey apart, so roughly 100 miles. Merchants could stop, rest, safely, feed their animals, and trade goods and information. They were the essential hubs that made the whole network tick. Okay, so with all this success came a brand new problem. lugging around giant chests filled with thousands of heavy metal coins across an entire continent, it wasn't just a hassle, it basically put a giant target on your back for any bandit the Mongols might have missed. The system desperately needed a financial upgrade. And that upgrade, you guessed it, came from China. They called it flying cash. And the name is just perfect, isn't it? Because it basically made value feel weightless. It was one of the world's very first forms of paper money, and really, the beginning of a true banking system. And look how simple and absolutely revolutionary this was. A merchant drops off their heavy coins in one city and gets a paper receipt, a bill of exchange. Then they can travel totally light, without the weight or the risk. When they get to their destination, they just walk into another banking house, hand over the paper, and get their cash. It's the direct great-great-great-grandfather of modern banking.
So what's the big takeaway here? What does this all mean? Well, the rebirth of the Silk Roads wasn't just some dusty historical event. It kicked off a chain reaction of changes that would ripple across the entire globe and, no exaggeration, lay the foundations for the world we live in today.
And the key thing to remember is that these effects were global. In Europe, cities started banding together to form these powerful commercial alliances, like the Hanseatic League, to get a piece of the action. Over in Asia, the crazy demand for goods actually pushed China towards a form of early industrialization. And maybe most important of all, those brilliant financial ideas like flying cash started to spread west, creating the very foundation of modern capitalism. This quote really just ties it all together perfectly. It wasn't just one thing. It was the combination of better technology for travel and smarter systems for money. And notice the direction it's all flowing? These critical, world-changing innovations spread from east to west, fueling a truly global transformation. Which brings us to a final thought to chew on. The Silk Roads connected the world with camels and shits, and it changed absolutely everything. Today, we're connected by fiber optics and satellites. So it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What new kinds of cities, what new ideas, and what new ways of living is our own global network building for us right now?